Regarding Men with Janice Fiamingo, Paul Elam, and Tom Golden. Episode 7, Feminism, Transgenderism, and Ideology.
Well, hello everyone. We are here again with a contentious topic that we hope to keep focused on, mainly on men's issues. We're talking today about transgenderism, if that is an acceptable term, I'm not sure. I'm Janice Fiamingo, and I'm here with Paul Elam and Tom Golden. And we're going to discuss what recent controversies and public awareness about people who transition either from male to female or from female to male, what that discussion allows us to see about both the social and the biological reality of men and women. I think that's going to be kind of our main focus. We were reading an article together that talked about the fact that in both the United States and in Great Britain, there's generally amongst the public a lot of sympathy for individual trans people. I think we all share that. But also a lot of skepticism about the underlying ideology, the notion that gender identity is simply anything one feels deeply in the moment, and that it's unconnected to biology. There's skepticism about that. And I think maybe we all probably, to some extent, share that too. I don't know, how we want to start with this. Two issues for me stand out in a lot of the discussions that I've heard recently. One of them is what it reveals about the hypocrisy of the feminist movement. As we know, there are a number of radical feminists. They're given the derogatory term TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, who are not at all happy with the trans movement's claim that felt gender identity equals gender reality, and they're making common cause in all sorts of odd ways with certain conservatives. They've been treated with quite a bit of deference and even celebration by others, mainly conservatives, but others as well who aren't happy with this idea about gender ideology. And one of the things that really strikes me is that one of the major complaints about these TERFs is that they don't like they don't like trans women coming into female-only spaces, and they, refuse to believe that somebody who claims to be a woman who was born a man can ever be a woman. And this is interesting for all sorts of reasons, one of which is that the last 20 years has been all about women invading men's spaces, male-only spaces, and being outraged and crying sexism and misogyny the moment any man ever tried to defend a male-only space, whether it was on the basis of biology or on the basis of men's emotional and psychological need for those spaces. So I can't help but feel there's a certain ironic appropriateness about feminist anger over this notion of the invasion of spaces. I also can't help but think that part of, maybe not entirely, but part of what propels the animus against trans women amongst these TERFs is actual just basic anti-male bigotry. That for them, no matter what a trans woman may have gone through in order to claim that female identity, this person is still a male and is still therefore despicable. So that's one of the things that I've noticed about these kinds of conversations. And the other thing that's really fascinating that, I probably will want to talk about a lot is the experience of individuals formerly female who have now become male. And rather than, we would expect that if feminist theory were correct, that becoming male and having been female in the past would mean you suddenly enter a social realm of enormous ease and enormous social advantages, and that you won the lottery in terms of never again feeling fear, never again feeling marginalized or feeling invisible. But in fact, often it seems that the opposite is true, that becoming male opens a lot of individuals' eyes to the reality that male privilege is indeed a feminist myth. So those are two interesting avenues for discussion.
Let me add one more thing to that, Janice. Well, first of all, I'm shocked that you found hypocrisy in feminists.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, when has that ever happened before?
Yeah.
The other bit of hypocrisy in all this that I find from the TERFs is that feminists for more like the past 50 years have been asserting doggedly that there is no real biological difference between men and women, that it doesn't exist, that everything is socialized. So you would think that a male to female transition for a transgender individual, that would be the ultimate realization of the feminist utopia, that it's living proof. And the moment it started happening, and well, I mean, transgenderism has been here for thousands of years, but the moment it started becoming a real part of the public discourse, we saw the emergence of feminists who want to shut it all down because they're not real women.
Yeah.
And it's like they took, without noticing, they took everything they've been proclaiming to believe for the past half century, threw it right out the window and dusted off their hands like it was never there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
Exactly. And I read a quote from TERF that was basically about that. And I can't remember the exact quote, but basically what she was saying was, we think this is actually men trying to invade feminist space in order to get the advantages that we've had, that we've worked so hard for. You know, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the biology thing is just absolutely fascinating. From everything is socially constructed now into, well, you have to have a vagina, you know, in order to be a real.
You're not a born woman.
Yeah.
That's the term the TERFs use, is
Yes.
born. And they are one of the most virulent sects of feminism that you'll encounter.
You think?
They are. Oh, absolutely. The TERFs are crazier than most.
Yeah.
There was a what do you call it? A conference, basically, where there were 4 TERFs at the Heritage Foundation, if you can believe that. And we'll put a link below where you can actually see this conference. It was fascinating to watch and very informative, actually, but fascinating. But one of the things that struck me was that at the very end of the conference, they got a standing ovation. The Heritage Foundation gives 4 TERFs a standing ovation. Now, how about that?
Yeah, it's politics makes strange bedfellows, as everyone has always said, and that's certainly the case here. I mean, a lot of what TERFs say about their reasons for not accepting trans women into female-only spaces, if it were said about any other group in any other context, would be seen as just pure bigotry. That, you know, I was listening to a debate. It was on Louder with Crowder, not a very recent one, actually. I think it went back all the way to 2015, and it was between a lesbian feminist who was strongly against the inclusion of trans women as women, and a trans woman named JJ. And basically, her main objection was that she said once, trans women ruined the Michigan Women's Festival, whatever that means, because they wanted to come in and be part of this female-only space. How did they ruin it exactly? She didn't say. And yes, her repeated refrain was that I don't have to affirm your denial of biology. I don't have to affirm your delusion that you are a woman simply because you say you are. Now, men have been unable to say that to women for years, and in fact, major institutions in our society, the police services, the fire department, have had to change their requirements in order to affirm the feminist delusion that there are no biological differences between men. Any man who tried to say, look, there are actually, and these are going to affect the ability of firefighters to do their jobs, to rescue people from burning buildings, they were just told that they, were male supremacists or whatever. So yes, there's certainly that aspect of it. There's a woman in Vancouver who runs a online magazine called Feminist Current. I'm sure you're familiar with it, and her name is Megan Murphy. Pardon me?
Oh, I said I read it every day.
Yeah. Her name is Megan Murphy, and she made a career for herself as a man-hating feminist, like quite explicitly. Although occasionally she would say, "I don't." Of course, feminists don't hate all men, but then she would, begin articles by saying, "Here's this week's installment of what the ever-loving fuck is wrong with men," and she would talk about how male sadomasochism is deeply rooted, and men, all men pose a threat to women, and their sexual violence is condoned in society and out of control, etc. She said that for years and years and years. She's now come out as a radical TERF, and she's been banned from Twitter and has suddenly emerged as a free speech champion. And a lot of people, of course, have noted that there's terrible hypocrisy in the fact that she was able for years to say the most blatantly male hating things, and yet now she merely for saying on Twitter that a man is not a woman, she's been banned. Now I of course support her free speech right to say that, to assert that basic biological truth, but my heart does not bleed for Megan Murphy. I also think it's interesting that not only does the TERF opposition, and we should say perhaps that there are lots of different schools within feminism, some of which are very welcoming to trans individuals for precisely the reason that you said, Paul, because they don't believe in biology. But the other thing that the TERF insistence that trans women can never be women, strange thing that it exposes about their ideology is that they've always said that patriarchy was about male supremacism and male hatred of women, the exclusion of women as men's other. So now all of a sudden we have a group of men who don't want to be men and want to be women, not because they want to oppress women in any way, but because they actually feel that they are and want to be women and to support women and be part of women's community. And yet the trans exclusionary radical feminists say that this is itself a kind of patriarchal domination. So it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Either patriarchy is about men who think men are superior to women, or patriarchy is about men who want to be women. It can't be both at the same time, and yet that's exactly what
you can if you're a feminist.
Yeah,
feminists
exactly.
can have two conflicting thoughts at the same time.
Yeah.
One thing I want to go back to for a moment, Tom, you mentioned the speech for the Heritage Foundation where the 4 TERFs got a standing ovation.
Right.
To me, it's really clear what that's about, that they're a lot more afraid of transgenderism than they are of feminism. To me, this is traditional conservatives.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Jumping for joy at a woman speaking out against something that frightens them personally.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I see in that. I don't know, I'll get some criticism for that. That's fine. But it seems apparent to me, and this is just one of the ways that I think we always have to remember in looking at men's issues, that we must be very careful to look past just feminism. Because here you have a place like the Heritage Foundation and all these assumedly, at least pro-human, pro-male individuals lauding hateful, bigoted feminists just for taking this stand against transgenderism.
Yeah.
And that to me reeks of the bigger problem for men when we go to address these issues. What we're really fighting is a lot more complicated than, feminism run amok.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, it's all about gynocentrism. And I noticed that in the Louder with Crowder discussion, Steve Crowder, whom I love, but he totally bent over backwards to affirm the lesbian perspective, which was that women have been so oppressed, so badly treated that they need their female-only spaces. And a man who merely becomes a woman, even if he goes through surgery, etc., cannot understand her oppression. I thought it was the same thing when Tucker Carlson recently interviewed a lesbian feminist who was excluded from some organization, I can't remember exactly what. And again, he didn't ask her any challenging questions. He was just so delighted, in this kind of, I don't know, in a very flattering kind of way. And yes, in a relieved sort of way, that here was this woman coming and saying this thing. And his tendency to be skeptical of these kinds of ideological claims completely melted away. So I think that is a very good point.
As long as it's not helping men, they can agree that it's good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, and it's an incredibly dangerous alliance, I think, because it's an alliance with people who have built their ideology on really extreme hatred of men.
Yes.
And so these are the last people anybody wants to form an alliance with, even if the alliance seems to be grounded in, kind of common sense recognition of biological reality. It isn't, I don't think, at all.
Yeah, if I could change trajectory just for a moment here, the part of the difficulty for me in all this is that it robs us of our ability to understand what's going on the human level. I mean, we politicize this issue so much that, one, I'm going to say it, I wake up and go to sleep every day seeing a man in the mirror, believing that I'm a man, and living with that awareness. I can't possibly imagine what it would be like to be in the body of one sex, but to internally feel convicted that you're actually the other. The conflict that must bring, I mean, is absolutely, totally, and completely overwhelming.
Yes.
And we don't get to talk about that with any kind of compassion on a cultural level, because we're too busy acting like trained seals for the Heritage Foundation speech by 4 TERFs or whatever. It's really crazy. This is, there is compassion needed in this, and I'm not trying to virtue signal. I've enjoyed several talks with Xander Keg, who we're both familiar with, and he told me as a trans man that he went through the transition. The first thing that he noticed was that nobody gave a fuck about him anymore. And these are his words, not mine. Right. Even as a big, oversized dyke feminist, people every day asked her how she felt, how she was doing, and genuinely wanted to know. And the moment he started presenting as a male in public, the world stopped caring, didn't want to hear anything. And indeed, the most common question that he got in touring and talking about his transition was, what's male privilege like?
Right.
We don't have a discussion about any and all of this stuff. We're too busy trying to pick sides in a war. Now, I'm going to make it real plain. I believe in individual liberty. If you want to live as a man or a woman, it's none of my business, and shouldn't be the government's business, shouldn't be anybody's business. Don't expect me to build a bathroom for you.
Exactly.
I'm serious about that.
Oh, exactly. I agree.
Reach in my pocket and don't expect me to honor a special lobby on this. I'll treat you like you want to be treated, and I won't be a bigot and an asshole. But that's where it stops. And that is for women becoming men, making that transition. That's one of the hardest lessons. And it's another thing we don't talk about is the difficulty that transgender men have in learning to navigate the masculine landscape. Yes. It is treacherous for them. They are so used to one experience as a woman, and they come in, and the appearance between men is that we don't give a fuck about each other.
Right.
Is that we'll stick the knife in with each other and twist it. In some ways, that's true. But there's another part of it that is hard to see. The men bond.
I'm having trouble again. I can't hear anything.
It'll come back. Hang in there.
Can you hear us now?
Okay, now I came back again. Yeah, I'm having some trouble. Sorry about that.
It's Nando's
That's all right.
fault.
It'll come back. But anyway, as I was saying, that men bond through roughness. They bond with very few words. They bond with a very slight amount of body contact with each other. These things are so alien to the world of women,
Right.
but there is a tremendous amount of intimacy in that women never see, and that trans men have a terrible time coming to terms with.
Yes.
Because they're used to the woman's emotional experience.
Yes.
And again, this is something else, clinically, working with trans people, talking to them and having a public dialogue. These are the things we should be talking about, in my opinion, and not so much about whether every state's got to cough up $1 billion to build new bathrooms, or whether or not you're really a man or really a woman, or any of these other moron conversations, in my opinion. Because in the end, it doesn't matter. Anyway, had to rant about that for a minute.
No, man, that was a worthwhile rant. The trans people that I've found so wonderful are the ones, the trans men, who have written about their transition, Paul, from women to men, but specifically about their emotional transition and how they deal with emotions differently. Because, all of our years of research with testosterone researchers have been struggling to try and prove that it's related to aggression and violence, which is bullshit, And so now we get a whole group of people, these biological women, who have taken huge doses of testosterone, and now we can see what happens to them as far as the way they deal with emotions. And there's this great book, Max Valerio wrote this book called The Testosterone Files, and it's about his transition from female to male. But the things that I loved about the book were that he talked about the idea of how it was so hard for him to start to understand things from a male perspective emotionally. He'd say, before it was like, I'd go to my girlfriends and cry, but now the tears have dried up. We know now that testosterone literally dries up the tears. And he said, God, one of the things he said that's so important, he says, and now I'm finding that when I'm in the throes of feeling something, I cannot articulate what is happening. I cannot articulate what is happening. How many times in therapy have I seen men, you say, well, what are you feeling? And they say, he can't articulate it. He's not there. And testosterone is a part of that. And I got to give you a Max quote. Max, at the end of the book, Max is talking about this whole transition. And Max says, I had believed that men could cry just as much as women if they would just let themselves go. Men were victims of a masculine ethos that forbade tears, that made them into unfeeling, seething septic tanks of repressed pain, ready to lash out. I was wrong. Max learned by taking the testosterone, oh my God, these men are naturally like this. This is their natural state. This is not something that they're making up. This is something, I'm that way too, So it's my hat is off to these people, and to Max in particular, for being able to articulate this stuff, because it's so incredibly helpful. It's just amazing,
What people don't get, the worst of this is, here is another teaching opportunity with what you said, Tom, for therapists who work with men.
Yes.
Because mostly what we have are feminist indoctrinated therapists who write out a treatment plan and literally say something as brain dead as client will cry ×3 in sessions regarding death of father. Those are, I'm not exaggerating, folks.
No, I hear you. It's worse than that, though.
And sometimes men release tears to deal with pain and that, but mostly what men tend to do is take action and to do it together.
Yes.
It's like guys getting a divorce, you'll see them grab a friend and go fishing. And they may not say 10 words to each other while they're in the bass boat. But those hours in that boat are healing. They're part of the grieving process. And we have an entire industry of feminist clinicians who do not understand this.
All they want to do is talk. And the other thing that men do, Paul, is that they'll move towards solitude.
Yep.
Move towards being quiet. And it's in the quiet that they process. Dangerous. What's that?
Which is where it can get dangerous.
Well, yeah, in some ways, but it also gets healed sometimes. Because men are basically telling their story within that solitude. So it's a good thing. And people shame them all the time. You know,
They
they
shame
didn't.
them for not expressing feelings. They shame them for isolating. And I agree with you. More often than not, they're going to heal. But this is where men, I think, could stand to do a little better job looking out for each other, is during those periods of isolation,
Yeah,
particularly during a divorce, when the suicide rate is 11 times in
and
men as in
that's
women.
that's the problem for men, is that men will tend to isolate and either go into solitude or do some action, and it keeps them away from people who would say, hey man, come on, I'm going to take you into the damn emergency room, you got trouble right now. You know, because women interact to heal, so they're talking to other people, and those people go, hey, something's wrong, I'm yanking you to the hospital. Men don't have that opportunity, you know. And I'm sure the trans men really get an eyeful of how things are different for them. You know,
Absolutely.
boy, oh
I
boy.
bet you it is a rude awakening.
Yeah, and Xander has been very articulate in being able to describe that.
Yes, he
That
has.
whole thing about now no one gives a shit about me. You know, no one asks how I'm doing anymore. He's a man.
And what can I say but welcome to my world?
Exactly, Paul. And we've learned how to deal with that, and we take different steps in order to heal ourselves. But yeah, for trans men, I'm sure it's really tough.
Yeah, can you imagine having to take that in? Almost, I mean, transitions happen over a long period of time. This is
Yeah,
one of the things I learned from Xander, that you don't just go in for an operation and you're done.
right.
But still, it's a relatively short period of time. Can you imagine going from being one sex to living in the world as the other in that period of time? And then all of a sudden, nobody cares. Nobody gives a damn. Nobody wants to hear your pain. Nobody wants to know what you're going through. I mean, I wonder about the suicide rate in these people.
Yes, I wonder that too. In fact, two of the stories that the TERFs told about these young girls who were like teenagers who were transitioning into being men even though their parents didn't want them to, basically they did it anyway. Both of them, maybe it was one of them, but they ended up basically homeless and isolated and unhappy, extremely unhappy, you know? And I think that's a part of what's happening here, is that this transition is really tough. Now, I think sometimes what I've read and what Max talks about in the book is that the trans men will stick together and they kind of learn from each other about how to do things, and their buddies, their male buddies, will help them too. But it's a rough road, you know, it's a bumpy ride, I'm sure. My heart goes out to them. That's tough.
I think that, you know, you really made such a good point, both of you too, about how, I mean, this whole discussion, it could be an opportunity for us all to have a deeper understanding of sex, or if we want to use the term gender, which I'm always trying to get away from, gendered experience. It really could help us to have a far deeper, and it's quite exciting actually to be able to think about what testosterone actually does, and think first-hand accounts from trans men who are experiencing that. I mean, what an amazing thing to finally get away from the idea that anything men do that feminists don't like, and that our whole society really now it seems doesn't like, actually is deeply rooted in testosterone. Even things like impatience, or the incredible focus that some men have for their work or for a passion or whatever, that these things are not social constructs. They're not the result of privilege. They're not the result of power and control games. They're about what it means to be a man at the most basic level. And yeah, it's amazing that, well, I mean, maybe this will become that opportunity if we don't allow it to be hijacked by the very shrill voices, both on the side of the trans lobby and, you know, on the radical feminist side of things. Because yeah, I thought that too. I mean, for any readers who are interested, if you want a really quick, I think it's 4 stories. There's a Washington Post article fairly recently that includes Xander's story, incredibly articulate, and also 3 other trans men and their experience. One of the things that Xander said that I also thought was really amazing was, if I'm remembering correctly, he is a social worker. I think he's a team of social workers. And it's mostly women also, of course. And, he said that it is amazing to him now to sit around the table and to talk about men's issues as it relates to social work. And if you have a violent woman, the conversation is always around what's causing the violence. Is there mental illness? Is there a history of sexual violence? Is there an addiction problem? All that kind of thing. But if the man is violent, it's just, this is how men are. This is their assertion of power and control, and it's never acceptable. So, and so he's really seeing now that total lack of compassion for men.
Yes.
And so, one has to wonder if often I hear anti-trans activists saying that the fact that many transgender individuals commit suicide proves that this is an unhealthy thing. That people shouldn't be allowed to transition. But it may well be, as you're saying, that part of the problem is that we are not, as a society, attentive to the human dilemma of existing in the other sex and how difficult that is. And so these stories of trans men are a call to us to actually listen. And it's amazing. One guy in the Washington Post article talked about how the first day that he went outside, sort of presenting entirely as a man, he walked out, and one of the first things that happened to him was that he tried to go into a building, and a woman walked in front of him, and he was expecting that she would hold the door open for him, as had happened, so many times before when he was presenting as a woman, and the door just slammed shut in his face. He said he literally walked into the door. And that too is just fascinating. It's a sort of trivial example in a way, maybe, but all of the people who wrote about their transition, I think, mentioned something about that, the automatic assumption that they'd had as women that they would be deferred to, and that they'd be getting on the bus first, or people would give them seats, all those kinds of things, and then to have that not be a part of their reality either. I mean, all these things are really fascinating.
Yes.
Now, this metaphorically, this slam door is beautiful, because that's exactly what it is. And to me, it's precisely why we have TERFs. They don't want, and much to their discredit, the trans activist community is doing a poor job of getting the real issues out there. It's all about angry activism and demanding things from government, which is, I don't know if people can't learn anything from feminists. They should learn that is a dead-end road ultimately for people, the victim ideology. But they don't want this discussion that we're having about what real issues are that trans men go through. Why? Because it would force us into a compassionate discussion about men.
Huh. That's interesting.
And they're not going to have that.
Yeah.
Ever. It would force us into an honest discussion about men, about testosterone, about male emotions. All these things that you guys just said that we've all been talking about here, we would have to have a discussion about those things in order to talk honestly about transgenderism. And the feminist lobby is not going to allow that to happen. And I'm beginning to think that the trans lobby is not going to allow that to happen.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Huh. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, there are, of course, there are legitimate issues on the feminist side too. We talked briefly about them before, about the invasion of trans women into women's sports, and the impact that that's having on women, that kind of thing. And there are a lot of problems with bathrooms, and there have been some cases of men actually sexual predators masquerading as trans women in order to gain access to women-only spaces. Of course, I have sympathy, but that's a different issue really altogether. That isn't the ordinary trans individual who genuinely wants to make the transition is not attempting to use their trans status in order to violate somebody. So
break through the cotton ceiling.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know about the cotton ceiling?
No, I don't.
That's the That's apparently the TERFs.
Oh, I do know. Yes.
The lesbian fear of their cotton underpants being broken by men, basically. And they're accusing the trans women of possibly breaking the cotton ceiling. Can't make this stuff up, Paul.
Yeah, and it is.
That should have been the other. You can't make this shit up.
I know. That's just what I was saying.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
but you're right. I mean, I think you're both of your 2 points about how this does that. Therefore, it's too bad because it prevents the kind of really important and incredibly helpful discussion of what it actually is to be male in our society. And especially even about, I mentioned this to you guys last week after we stopped recording, about the sexual experience of men and women. I mean, essentially, sex has now become a discussion that is so totally dominated by feminist perspectives that it's impossible for any woman who's really interested to actually know, at least, I mean, aside from honest conversations with friends, but to understand anything about men's sexual reality. It is entirely exclusive of men's real experiences. And that's incredibly dangerous considering that we are obsessed now with women's sexual safety and with the experience of women, which is supposedly one of sexual harassment and constant sexual harassment and sexual objectification. Because I remember as a young person, marinated in feminist ideology, watching a program long ago in the 1990s about the experiences of trans men and how their whole sexual experience and sexual identity changed when they were taking testosterone, and how everything about the way they understood themselves as sexual beings changed. And that too is like completely, any compassionate recognition of that is completely off the table in today's cultural climate, and that's really too bad.
I heard a interview of a trans man on, I think it was on NPR, talking about his experiences, and one of the things he talked about was that after he started taking a lot of testosterone, he got interested in specific body parts, especially breasts and butts. And he said he'd see a woman walking down the street, and his eyes would just go immediately to her breasts. And as she walked by, he had an irresistible urge to turn around and look at her butt. And I'm thinking, welcome to my world. That's about right. That's about right. Oh, God, the other thing that interview said, which was fascinating, was the guy said that as soon as he started taking large doses of testosterone, he started doing so much better in his physics class. He said he could not understand physics before testosterone, but as soon as he started taking the testosterone, it became easy. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah. And yet we're not allowed to talk about any of those things. Now, it would help us so much to understand how we could sanely order our society and how we could sanely discuss the balance between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And also how we could sanely discuss the things that especially young men do. We now have this notion that I remember, I don't know if it was Warren Farrell or some men's issues advocate who talked about how, we're so down on a young man if he reaches out and touches a young woman, let's say at a dance. We never think of the 1,000 times that he prevented himself from doing so. He had this very, very strong urge to touch a woman, on the buttocks, let's say. The one time he gives in and suddenly he's a sex fiend with absolutely no understanding on the part of women of the power of his desire to do so and how often he has exercised his restraint. And feminists again I can just imagine the response to me saying this somehow gives permission, to men to behave badly, that all that kind of thing. No, what we're talking about is understanding why we are in the situations that we're in. And that's something that, the fact that feminists and our society in general doesn't want to understand is a very frightening fact.
The last thing they want to understand is men.
Yeah.
It's funny, Janice, you were talking a couple of minutes ago about this obsession that we have on women's sexual safety. And it is only equaled by our obsession on women's freedom to make sexually irresponsible decisions.
Yes, absolutely.
Talk about those two conflicting ideas residing
Yeah.
at the same time. And that's where you get, if I come out and say, how about a rape prevention programs? Don't teach women how not to get raped, teach men not to rape. That even if you talk about teaching women how to take care of themselves physically in situations, which I am all for doing, you do that, and I've gotten hate mail over advocating that.
Yep.
It's really, really crazy.
Yeah. I know So, I mean, maybe it is possible that this moment will be one that leads to a greater honesty and understanding about some of these issues, the differences between men and women, the different experiences that men and women have, and maybe some trans individuals. I'm sure the last thing most trans individuals want is to have to be spokespersons for the entirety of the sex. But certainly it's true that those people do have unique insights about what it means to cross the divide.
Yes.
They do, and it would serve their cause a lot better if they were a little better about getting the real issues out there, those kind of issues. The ones that people will find interesting and engaging and want to listen to, because most people, once you get their attention with something, especially if you frame it in terms of a woman's experience. I mean, the TERFs got the standing ovation from the Heritage Foundation. Most of that was, like I said, it was the fear of transgenderism and the gynocentrism, but a lot of it, gynocentrism. There's ways that they could use these issues and talk about them, which would inch us closer to this dangerous territory of framing things in terms of how they affect men.
Yeah, and get past some of people's fears. I think people are afraid of the whole thing. It's pretty scary for people.
Well, it would have been scary for me maybe when I was 15, but I mean, after you grow up,
that someone's going to change their sex. I mean, it's different, but we're supposed to be the grown-ups in the room here. And the grown-ups don't want to deal with it, because they're afraid. I think it's at least a part of it. And
maybe
so
so
too.
And then there's all kinds of other issues in this, that the idea of hormone therapy for children.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Which, I mean, we could do a whole hour on that bit of insanity and child abuse.
Planned Parenthood is now involved in hormone replacement therapy for little girls.
Yeah.
And they wonder why Republicans want to take their funding away.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, well, that is a place where I think people have the right to feel afraid, because it is terrifying to think of indoctrinating children, as young as age of 3 or 5, that they should think about transitioning, and parents being pressured and teachers being pressured to affirm this questioning of one's gender identity at such a young age, and therefore these hormone blockers being given and everything. That is, it's amazing. I mean, here in Ontario, a bill was passed by the Ontario provincial government that gives child and protection services the right in certain cases to take children away from their families if the child has been led to believe that he or she is actually in the wrong sex body, and if the parents object, the child can be apprehended and placed in a foster home. So I mean, that is terrifying. We're talking about hideous state control over families and over children, to an end that nobody can imagine. And these hormone blockers, we don't even know what the long-term consequences of them are, but many of them have irreversible consequences, and they're very serious. So that aspect of the trans movement is quite frightening, certainly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and think of it this way: if we don't care about children any more than to be giving them amphetamines and other drugs to manage their behavior, and not thinking about consequences of that, it's not much of a stretch to get to this. Nothing personal, Janice, but in some ways your country is really scary these days.
It is. Yeah, it's a bizarre. Yeah, it's truly bizarre to think that we've come to this so quickly.
Yeah.
But there is this love. We have a love affair with the state as the ultimate arbiter of all things.
Yes, we're not far
Great
behind. Paul.
God. Yeah, well, the Democrats
We're
are
working
moving
on
in
it.
that direction. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Yep. It's crazy.
so yeah. So a lot of stuff to talk about, but this was a good start, I think.
Yeah, it's a good start. It's a good start. Are we coming up to closing?
Yeah, I think it's
so.
a time to start issuing some awards here.
Yeah. Who gets the award, Paul?
Well, the humanitarian award we agreed would go to Xander Kegg for putting himself out there, making himself, in essence, a target everywhere he goes, even in his own community, by standing up for what the real experiences of his transition has meant to him.
Amen.
And by contributing such meaningful work to the dialogue. So he gets that award.
Yep.
And we decided that we would split the flying puta to go between the transgender lobby and the turf lobby.
2 of them. There they come. There they come. Oh.
Putas of a feather fly together.
Take off, you putas.
No kidding. So, guys, wise up.
Yeah, man.
We don't need the nonsense anymore. We need to get real.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for a great discussion.
Indeed,
I really
it was a
enjoyed
good
it.
discussion. Thank you, Janice. It was good. And we'll see you all next week for a brand new shoe.
We don't even know what we're going to talk about then.
That makes it fun.
That'll be something.
It'll be something.
Yeah, it'll be something. We'll see you then.
Or
Bye-bye.
maybe we'll run out of material.
Probably.
Never.
Okay, bye-bye, folks.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See if I can turn this thing on.
Turn that damn thing off, Tom.
Men are good.